You're here because you want to know the best two-player board games of all time, and you're not interested in yet another top 10 list. So instead, I'll give you 60 games that play great at two players because I have way too much time on my hands, and apparently you have far more money than you need. Now, this is really important. The games that I selected are not exclusively two players. I've always hated when content creators tell you their favorite two-player games, and yet all of them play exclusively at two players. But I think that's silly because when you want to know the best two-player games, you don't care if it plays more players. You just want to know the game that provides the best possible experience at two players. So first up is the best game to start with, Seven Wonders Duel. Seven Wonders Duel is a two-player strategy game where players develop civilizations by drafting cards, constructing buildings, advancing scientific progress, and waging military conflicts to achieve victory through military supremacy or points. This game really is a contemporary classic, for obvious reasons. It's just a really good game, and the pyramid drafting, to this day, even though this game is pretty old now, I still find it pretty clever and really engaging. You know, having various ways to achieve victory in a two-player game always provides an enjoyable experience, but that card drafting, I love the tension that can come from really wanting a card, but not wanting to reveal the card underneath because you know your opponent wants it. It just creates this really interesting way to interact with your opponent that you don't typically see in a card drafting game. It's another layer beyond the usual, taking something someone wants, that denial type conflict that you see in a lot of these types of games. For me, this one's an easy A. And next up is the best feld game ever made, Castles of Burgundy. The Castles of Burgundy is a strategic tile placement game where players develop their estates in medieval France by building settlements, trading, and optimizing their actions to earn the most victory points possible. This is easily one of the best classics you can get for under $30, or at least I think it's still under $30. The price of everything now is insane. What's funny is I actually love the cheap version more than the fancy copies that have been released. I find something so charming about it in a hobby space where it feels like every individual who isn't middle class is being phased out. It's kind of a breath of fresh air. But to the game itself, it's just so well balanced and such good tactical gameplay. You never feel completely screwed by luck, even though there is some luck, and it's a cool design feat. I think this is Feld's best game, and honestly, it's one of the few games of his that I actually really enjoy because I'm not the biggest Feld fan. And despite Kim and I playing this quite a bit, no two games have ever really felt the same. Despite that lack of interaction, there's a lot of racing here to be had, but where you're trying to snag that castle piece before your opponent, or you're trying to finish off all the green areas to get the most points. The game is one that allows you to sort of bunker down and do your own thing, but also be very aware of your opponent's movements, making you feel like you're getting the best of both worlds in a single game by experiencing indirect confrontation and also nose on board puzzle solving. It's fun. It's fun. This one is our first S of the day. And next up is the game that I hated when I played with more than two players, Underwater Cities. Underwater Cities is a strategic worker placement and card management game where players compete to build the most advanced underwater civilization by expanding networks, producing resources, and optimizing synergies between actions and cards. Like I said, I hated this game when first time I played it with friends, but when Kim and I decided to sort of bunker down and give it a go at two, I just kind of fell in love. There's something so wonderfully satisfying and strategically engaging to try to make sure that I'm playing not only the right card for a turn, but also performing the right action on the board. Because if the two colors match, the card color and the board color, you get to do both actions. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but it creates this really fun decision space that I really enjoy. Now, I should say I'm cheating a little because I have the expansion, and honestly, I've mixed them up so much that I don't really know which is base game and which is expansion. This is one of the few games where I think the expansion, I think it might be necessary. But regardless, it's a brilliant game, and it's definitely one checking out. I think without the expansion, maybe an A, but with the expansion, definitely an S tier game. And next up is Kim's favorite game, The Search for Planet X. The Search for Planet X is a deduction and logic-based board game where players use clues and scientific methods to explore the night sky, gather evidence, and uncover the elusive Planet X before their opponents. Kim is a huge deduction fan. Sadly, she is not here, and aside from Cryptid, there are not a lot of deduction games I actually enjoy. And this game, unlike something like Awkward Guest, is a deduction game in its most pure form. And that's not good for the games that I enjoy. Yeah, you can sort of gauge where roughly some things are if you're listening to what questions your opponent is asking, but you're mostly just kind of doing your own little puzzle, and often I find that experience not particularly rewarding in a two-player environment, especially, or specifically, when it's a deduction game. I want to kind of make deductions with other players, I think. I think I'm in the minority here, but for me, The Search for Planet X is a C tier game. But don't tell Kim I said that. And next up is Watergate. Watergate is a 2-player asymmetric strategy game where one player controls the Nixon administration trying to cover up the scandal, while the other plays as journalists working to connect evidence and expose the truth. I didn't think it was possible to perfectly distill Twilight Struggle into a very simple 30-minute game. And here we are. This isn't a game I crave routinely, but it's a solid little 2-player game that really does provide you a fun sort of cat and mouse card play experience. This is definitely one of those games that requires repeat plays so that you can really enjoy the experience and sort of relish the experience of diving deep into the mind of your opponent to anticipate what card they're going to play next. I'm really happy I own this one. It's definitely worth checking out. This game is an A tier game. And next up is the best-selling game in the last couple of years, I think, SkyTeam. SkyTeam is a cooperative 2-player game where one player acts as the pilot and the other as the co-pilot, working together through dice placement to successfully land an aircraft under various challenging conditions. I was so skeptical of this game because it seemed so crazy simple, and we're not big cooperative gamers in this house, but man, I really like this game. No, the no talking rule doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, but it's forgivable within the environment. And honestly, it almost becomes more fun because even without this, the strategy discussion between rounds, you get almost this like unspeakable rhythm with your partner where both you and your partner are sharing like a single mind, knowing exactly what you need to accomplish next. And if you don't get that type of connection, even that I find kind of fun because it just becomes this chaotic mess of crap. And this is one of the few semi-campaign games where I actually enjoy because I'm not required to remember, that NPC's name or that village between plays. We don't really encourage people to buy stuff on this channel because we never want to make videos to sell you shit. But this is one of the games that I think I would highly recommend to pick up and give it a try. I think this is an A tier game. A tier game. And next up is one of the best board games of all time, War of the Ring. War of the Ring is an epic strategy game set in the Lord of the Rings universe, where one player controls the Free Peoples, striving to destroy the One Ring, while the other commands Sauron's forces, seeking to conquer Middle-earth through military might or corruption. No other board game in the history of board games perfectly captures its source material like War of the Ring. War of the Ring makes you feel like you're in Middle-earth as the Free Peoples trying desperately to destroy the One Ring, where every other turn has you, constant fear that you're just about to be wiped out from the map and discovered by the shadow player. Likewise, as a shadow player, you always have this constant feeling of unease, wondering, if your force you're sending into this region will be enough, or if you're spreading yourself too thin, and what cards your opponent might have to ruin your day, and where the hell is that damn hobbit hiding? It's just an awesome game that even though admittedly I can't play it very often, due to how long the game lasts, I'm always happy to see it there in my collection, and I'm excited when I do get to bring it to the table. War of the Ring is easily just not one of the best war games I've ever played, but one of the best board games in my collection. This is a no-brainer. This is an S tier game for sure. And next up is Lost Cities. Lost Cities is a 2-player card game of risk and reward, where players embark on an archaeological expedition by strategically playing numbered cards in ascending order while managing their hand to maximize points and outmaneuver their opponents. Lost Cities has been around for, I think, forever, and yet I've just never been a fan. I try it probably once every couple years, and I still just really don't like it. It lacks any meaningful interaction between myself and my opponent, and the turns themselves are just so damn boring. Like every game feels exactly like the last game I played. So it has me feeling like I'm in some kind of like game loop, and I feel once you've played a few rounds, your excitement for the game just kind of evaporates. Plus you can get crazy unlucky with your card draws. I know there is some depth here. I know there is, despite the game being very light, but it gives me this weird feeling that I'm being punished for both for pushing my luck sometimes, but also for perfectly reasonable decisions, if that makes any sense. Like I never feel empowered with a good choice. Instead it feels so damn ambiguous. Like, do I start an expedition I know I can't finish, or discard a card that the other player might use against me? These choices get made a good amount, and I just don't find them particularly engaging. Lost Cities for me is a D tier game. I know it's blasphemy because I know for a lot of people this is an gateway game that they use to get to the hobby, but yeah, I really don't like this one. Next up is the best anime game, Bullet. Bullet is a fast-paced, pattern-building, and puzzle-solving board game where players control unique characters using their abilities to dodge incoming bullets and unleash powerful attacks in a race to defeat their opponent. Bullet is a really cool game that, although I don't play it much, I really like that I own because it usually impresses first-time players, and it's but it's pretty damn easy to teach. It's just a fun little game that allows me to be a dick to whatever friend I'm playing with in real time, and that's something I really enjoy. It feels like playing two-player Tetris back in the day on the original Nintendo with my friend who would come over to have fun, but really I just brought him over to destroy him with my high score. We've actually done a full review of this game on our channel, so if you wanted a more in-depth analysis, you could watch that. Actually, I think it was our first video ever made, so if you do go back and watch it, be very gentle. We were trying to figure things out, but we're still trying to figure things out. Yeah, this is an easy B game. I really like it. I don't like a lot of real-time games, but this is one of my favorites. And next up is Conflict of Heroes: Awakening the Bear. Conflict of Heroes: Awakening the Bear is a tactical wargame set during World War II, where players engage in squad-level combat, making strategic decisions to control key areas, complete missions, and overcome enemy forces in the Eastern Front. I feel like I really had to include a counter-based wargame, and this is my favorite one. Wargames don't get enough love on Board Game Geek, or hell, on YouTube for that matter. I really do think anyone who isn't interested in these types of games should give this one a shot, especially if you've played Undaunted and thought to yourself, like, I wonder if this could be more strategic and more fun. I won't lie, there are a lot of rules here to go through, and that's sort of par for the course for these types of games. But I think it's worth it, because the rules here are not superfluous. They add depth and interesting choices. And plus the rules here are actually easier to follow than most hex encounter war games. Playtime is relatively short for these style of games as well, which is fantastic. And the command point mechanics allows for better dice mitigation, which is enjoyable because, getting unlucky in any game directly impacts my experience. And the card play here combined with the individual powers on many of the units, I find is just deeply satisfying. This game adds so many awesome narrative elements that genuinely make you feel like you're like this brilliant commander issuing commands to your army, trying to hold back a tiger tank that's pushing through your lines, or leading a ragtag group of infantry past enemy sniper and machine gun zones just to complete an objective. It's just a lot of fun. This is a great game. Easy S tier. And next up is one of Rosenberg's many farming games, Fields of Arle. Fields of Arle is a two-player strategy game where players manage a farming community in 19th century Germany, focusing on resource management, land development, and balancing various tasks to build a successful farm. I know this one is very well loved, but I don't see the point of playing it over something like Caverna at 2 players. This one just feels like it was stretched so wide and thin that its mechanics end up feeling a little shallow. Like nothing here felt focused. I'll just try and get as many hides as I can and convert them to get as much wool as I can and so on, repeated ad nauseum. And I'm not the biggest fan of journey points either. Clearing your farm, as tough it is as an Agricola, it's super easy here. And obviously I get that's on purpose because Rosenberg is naturally trying to make, I think, a more chill farming game. But to me, it just felt a little boring. Like the buildings, for example, they are a lot more interesting and provide more strategic depth, I think, in Caverna than they do here. And the buildings are pretty much the most important part of Arle, I think. Yeah, this one, it kind of felt like a flop to me. I'll take Caverna any time of the week over this game, maybe even at 2 players. So I'm going to put this, it's not a bad game. I just feel it's mid, so I'm going to put this at C. And next up is another Rosenberg game, Patchwork. Patchwork is a 2-player puzzle board game where players compete to build the most aesthetically pleasing quilt by selecting and placing Tetris-like fabric pieces while managing limited time and resources. There used to be a time on Board Game Geek where if you asked for a suggestion of a 2-player game, it didn't matter what the genre is. You could be like, I want the best 2-player war game. Somebody would come in and be like, you gotta play Patchwork. Like it was always the #1 suggestion for any 2-player game. But for myself, I think my interest in Patchwork just sort of waned over the years. Would I recommend Patchwork for a new gamer looking for a 2-player board game that's really light? Honestly, I really would. There is a lot of charm to the simplicity of the game, and yet within that simplicity is a surprising amount of depth. I think this is one that's punching above its weight class because it can be really hard decision when choosing what pattern you want on the board, beyond the typical, does this piece fit? But maybe it's the fact that I've just played it too much that I never really want to go back to it. It's just not a game I ever crave. So yeah, I kind of put this in the C tier. I think this is kind of a mid game, but it definitely is the best war game of all time. And next up is Star Realms. Star Realms is a fast-paced deck-building game where players compete to assemble powerful combos of ships and bases, aiming to reduce their opponent's authority to 0 before their own is depleted. This is one of those games that does its best to take a fairly common genre, here is deck building, and distill it as much as possible into this sort of new, raw essence. And I think Star Realms does it pretty damn successfully. Every card is easy to understand, and yet the choices on any given turn, they don't feel completely obvious or scripted. And the clan system is fun and makes every playthrough a little different, which in a really light game is absolutely essential because you never want to feel like you're in this sort of like repetitive loop with each new play. I do have some issues, however. There is this like huge snowball effect in this game where it feels like you can never make a comeback once you're caught on the back foot. However, the game is just so damn quick that I don't really mind that, because once you get that sinking feeling that you're doomed, it's pretty much over in a few turns anyway. This is a really good, cheap game that's well worth the price tag, I think. I don't love it, but I do enjoy it. This is an easy B. And next up is a better game set in space, Race for the Galaxy. Race for the Galaxy is a strategic card game where players build vast intergalactic empires by exploring new worlds, developing advanced technologies, and engaging in trade to accumulate victory points and outpace their opponents. This is yet another one of those games that I played with more than 2 players and actually didn't really enjoy, but then a friend suggested it just to play it at 2, and it just felt immensely better. And I think this one is held up really well despite being almost like 2 decades old. The actions themselves are fairly simplistic and easy to understand once you get a grip on all those symbols, but there is just an immense amount of depth here, and no 2 games I've played, despite playing Race a lot, have ever felt the same. Now, it helps that I have a lot of expansions, and sadly, I can't really rate this game just on the base game alone because I don't remember what the base game was like in its pure form, but I do know Alien Artifacts is the best expansion, so if you were thinking about getting one, you get that one. But yeah, not much else needs to be said about Race for the Galaxy. It's a really great game. I give it an A. It's an A game. I like it at 2 players. And next up is my favorite card game, masquerading as a miniature game, Summoner Wars. Summoner Wars is a tactical card game where players summon powerful units, cast spells, and strategically maneuver their armies on the battlefield to defeat their opponent's summoner and gain victory. Summoner Wars is like this charming little intro game for miniature wargaming, at least in my opinion. Each action feels unique and interesting, and the maneuvering, despite being on a grid, feels really damn rewarding as you plan and scheme where the best possible spot to move the unit is for maximum impact. The game does require you to know your faction really well, but once you do, it is very rich in tactics. It's almost like chess, but with a hell of a lot more theme, because every unit feels wonderfully unique and really fun. And the games here are super short. You can get most games done in under 30 minutes. And once you know what you're doing, and considering that each game made me feel like so many different interesting things were occurring, that's a hell of a feat. Because it's the only fairly abstract tactical game that actually made me walk away feeling like an actual narrative developed that you could discuss with your friends after the game. And I think that's a big part of the enjoyment for me. Yeah, I really like this game. Yeah, this is definitely an A game. Next up is everyone's favorite hidden movement game, Letters from Whitechapel. Letters from Whitechapel is a hidden movement and deduction game where one player assumes the role of Jack the Ripper, while others play detectives trying to track him down across Victorian London before he commits yet another crime. Some people will suggest this as a cooperative game, but come on, you don't want to work with anyone else as the police. You want to control the entire damn squad, like the brilliant strategist you are. Plus, you don't have that many friends anyway. That's why you're here with me deciding what the best 2-player games are. There's this really beautiful marriage between theme and mechanics occurring in this game that's I find really impressive. This is one of the few hidden movement games where you genuinely feel like a little tense when playing on both sides of the board. You'll just constantly have these moments as Jack feeling like you're just about to be nabbed on every turn, or as the police knowing that Jack might just be so close that if you can just get just over that one spot over there, you'd be able to catch him, no problem. I think this one for me is definitely a B game. It's a B game. It used to be an A, but spoiler, I guess, my management came around and to me it kind of blew it out of the water. But this is definitely still a very good game, B. And next up is Jaipur. Jaipur is a fast-paced 2-player card game where players take on the roles of merchants in the markets, competing to collect and sell goods for the highest profit while managing their camels and timing. Jaipur is one of those games that quickly wore out its welcome for me after 5 or 6 plays. This game started to boil down to, okay, what set am I collecting today and when will I sell it? There was no long-term strategy plan really, and the tactical decision space felt more limited and obvious with every single play. And every game between equally skilled opponents felt like it was boiling down to luck of the draw, and perhaps because we played it so much, the optimal move, it always kind of felt obvious on any single turn. And this left the game feeling like it was exactly the same as the last game I played. The loop just got really stale. The only thing tough in this game was tracking what my opponent does and estimating the value of sets. I'd have to collect based on available prizes and the chances of getting the cards I needed, but tough as that was, I didn't find it enjoyable. This one might upset the most people because I know this game is well loved. I don't know what it is, but a lot of these strictly two-player lighter games just kind of bore me to tears most of the time. I feel like when you're playing just two players, it's the perfect opportunity to bust out a big, heavy strategy game because there are less people at the table to make decisions and bog down the game with time. But I'm probably alone in that. Let me know in the comment section. And I'm kind of a heavier gamer too, but I do have a soft spot for some lighter games. And sadly, this one isn't it. So I give Jaipur, I give it a D. I give it a D. And next up is one of the few trick-taking games I actually enjoy, The Fox in the Forest. The Fox in the Forest is a trick-taking card game for two players, where each player strives to win tricks by strategically playing cards with special abilities, aiming to score points without overreaching and losing too many points. Now, this is a lighter game I actually enjoy, and what's funny is that it's also a trick-taking game, which is a genre I typically loathe. So this is a unique bird, I guess. I love that the odd-numbered cards all have their own unique powers that makes the decision space in this game feel far more interesting than the typical trick-taking game. And I love that each card never really felt like a throwaway, like each one felt impactful. But honestly, it really just comes down to how much I enjoy forcing someone to win a trick when they don't want to win one. A game that provides me a great way to be a dick and sort of like hide my dickish behavior behind mechanisms, that's a big win. That's a big win. Yeah, it's a perfect little two-player trick-taking game that I think easily deserves a B spot. Yeah, it's a good game. And next up is the perfect game to play at a board game cafe, Mr. Jack. Mr. Jack is a two-player deduction game where one player takes on the role of Jack the Ripper, trying to evade capture, while the other plays as a detective, attempting to deduce and corner him in Victorian London. I used to love Mr. Jack. It was honestly the only two-player game I kept going back to again and again so long ago because it felt so damn unique at times. So much of the game relies on this very sneaky machinations through bluffs and tactics that you'll sort of agonize over on every turn. It does this weird thing where it feels confrontational and yet oddly solitary. The powers themselves are super easy to learn and provide a lot of interesting tactical decisions beyond the typical like move here and move there. Over the years, however, that enthusiasm sort of waned, and now I hardly ever bring this game to the table. But I do still really enjoy it, and I likely wouldn't say no if a friend requested it. I think this one deserves a B. It's still a very good game. And next up is Eric Lang's best two-player game, Ankh, Gods of Egypt. Gods of Egypt is a dudes on a map game where players take on the role of ancient Egyptian gods, vying for dominance through an area control, strategic combat, and mythological powers. This might be the only dudes on a map game on this list. That's primarily because they never seem to play well at two players, but Ankh does an amazing job of bridging that divide because I think this one is actually best at two players. The game just nails the theme so well, and the action system is it's so damn good. It's like you know the thing you really want to do, but if you do that action, you will end up giving the other player the means to do something that you don't want to happen. So you have to consider every turn and opportunity you're providing yourself and your opponent, and that's just a really fun decision space to be. Plus, it feels really pleasurable moving all your miniatures at one time and just sort of like overwhelming your opponent. Yeah, the kid in me really likes that part. Everything you do in this game always feels like it has consequences, and very rarely do you feel that you were at the mercy of the game itself once it's finished. It sounds weird, but at two players, the game almost feels chess-like with very little randomness. You're constantly trying to foresee potential, counter moves as you attempt to outmaneuver your opponent. It's just so much more tense as a two-player game. Great game for a category that doesn't get a lot of love in the two-player space. Yeah, this is an easy A game. Great, check it out. And next up is the easily portable game, Hive. Hive is a two-player abstract strategy game where players take turns placing and moving unique, insect-themed tiles to surround the opponent's queen bee while avoiding having their own queen bee surrounded. So Hive is one of those abstract games that were like super popular many years ago when it first came out. That just never really resonated with me. It's one of those games I respected, but just didn't really want to play, even though I own it. Every game just kind of feels the same, which honestly is a criticism I suppose many people could levy against like chess or checkers or whatever, any sort of abstract game. It's good tactical play with lots of interesting choices available on any given turn, but it doesn't resonate with me. And it's a game now that just sort of sits on my shelves collecting dust. And honestly, I may never play it again. But yeah, I know I'm in the minority on this one. I feel like it's a mid game. I'm going to give it a C. And next up is a game that every other game tries to emulate these days, Twilight Struggle. Twilight Struggle is a 2-player historical strategy game set during the Cold War, where players control either the United States or the Soviet Union, vying for global influence through political, military, and covert operations while avoiding nuclear war. This is a brilliant classic game that was on the top of the Board Game Geek charts for just years. Fantastic game that is like peak 2-player experience. My only problem is that I don't really feel like bringing it to the table these days. You know, nothing really against the game itself. I might just have played it a bit too much and I don't get excited about it anymore. But if you've never played Twilight Struggle, you definitely should. It's an amazing game. And I don't know, everybody has said so much about this game already. It's been out for like, it feels like 20 years. It's a great game, definitely worth checking out. It's an A game still. Even though I don't play it much, it's an A game. And next up is another Star Wars property, Star Wars Unlimited. In Star Wars Unlimited, players will be battling one another with cards using the iconic heroes, villains, ships, and settings for the Star Wars universe in a quick and engaging collectible card game. I don't give a damn about Star Wars, but I did have some fun with this one, both in person at a buddy's house and a bunch of times on a site called a Felt Table, which was a pretty good interface. I love the alternate battlefields. I've seen this in some other card games before, but even so, it's fairly refreshing and adds a good dimension of depth to an otherwise straightforward deck building card game. The triggers, events, and powers are nothing you have not seen before for the most part, but they do all come together really nicely for an easy to follow and fun play experience. Games were super quick, and because of the way resources were handled, you are not only presented with a really interesting and tough decision every round, since you have to decide what cards to put aside as a resource, but the problem of luck is I found in this game to be quite well mitigated to some extent. You don't have to worry about drawing lands like in Magic the Gathering, and you know what you can afford at any given round, so you can even forgo playing a resource card at all if that advantages you for the round, and that's a cool decision to make. Like I said, there are lots of cool and interesting decisions in this game. However, this is a heavily saturated space that I really only dabble in from time to time. I enjoy this one, so I'm gonna give it a B. But there are other battling card games I enjoy a lot more, like Game of Thrones, the card game, or Flesh and Blood. I only need so many of these games in my collection, but it is a B game. It's a good game. And next up is the classic game, Carcassonne. Carcassonne is a tile placement game where players build a medieval landscape with cities, roads, and fields, strategically deploying their followers to claim features and score points as the landscape develops. One of the big daddy classics that is more or less a staple in every household, and for a good reason. The only reason this game stays in my collection, though, is because I still enjoy it at 2 players, and I have no interest in playing it with more. The game just feels far more tactical at 2 players, and stealing a farm or a castle, hell, even a road from your opponent when it's only one opponent is just way more impactful and enjoyable and satisfying. Carcassonne is a very good game that I'm going to stick in the B tier, I think. Primarily because it wins the award for lasting power. It's not one I pull out a lot these days, but I do feel like it should be in everyone's collection because it still makes an appearance probably once a year at the table, and always at 2 players. Yeah, B game, good game. And next up is Command and Colors Ancients. Command and Colors Ancients is a tactical wargame where players command armies in ancient battles using card-driven mechanics to maneuver units, engage in combat, and out-strategize their opponents to achieve victory. This is easily Borg's best game. Forget Battle Lore, forget Memoir. Command and Colors Ancient is the ultimate block war game. And once you get all those stickers placed it on all those blocks, and once that nightmare is over, you're in for a fantastic 2-player game that uses brilliant card play and maneuvering to provide a rich and fulfilling and somehow even more epic feeling every single time. And somehow, despite the heavy reliance on cards, it never feels like you're getting unlucky with your cards, provided you've made smart movement choices throughout the game. This is also a great way to dip your toes into war games. I've always wanted a battle game that allows me to feel like a general commanding ancient historical troops, and I think this game easily delivers. This is a great game. I'm going to put this in the A tier. Great game. Although I do recommend buying a used and finding somebody who has meticulously put all those stickers on those blocks. If you can avoid that, it's an even better game. And next up is the Imperium Series. Imperium is a deck-building strategy game where players lead a civilization through exploration, development, and conquest, using unique faction abilities to expand their influence and dominate the world. Imperium has so many great expansions and yet somehow manages to provide factions that feel so unique and interesting to play. The interaction here is pretty darn good, as many cards can have like a direct impact on your opponent, and sometimes it's not even in a take that manner, as some cards provide resources to the other players as well, which is cool because it makes you feel more like a civilization, since it's not all about war all the time. Starting with that super unique deck of cards that your faction gets, but also adding to that uniqueness as the game progresses and sort of building your identity with each new game is like a super rewarding feeling, and makes me feel, I don't know, it's one of the reasons I really love this game. This is an A tier stuff. It's hard to sort of understand at first, but once you do, you're gonna really like it. And next up is Targi. Targi is a 2-player strategy game where players place workers along the grid to claim intersection points, collecting goods and tribe cards to build the most prosperous desert tribe. I am not the biggest fan of this game that I know is a classic, since so many games I play this feel exactly the same. Yeah, I know that lots of games can boil down to that criticism, but for whatever reason, it just feels emphasized here. It could be because my turns never feel challenging, as every turn there definitely feels like there is this optimal move, and it's never really hard to determine what that optimal move is. Yeah, I don't like this one. It's not bad. It's not a bad game. I like it more than Jaipur, but yeah, it's a C. It's a C for me. And next up is Boop is an abstract strategy game where players place and boop cat tokens on a quilted board, causing adjacent pieces to move with the goal of lining up 3 kittens to turn them into cats and ultimately aligning 3 cats to win. This is a very cute little 2-player game that provides a surprising amount of depth, because you really do have to think ahead, because each movement you're making is all to establish a setup for future moves. It takes a few plays to really get the hang of it, because when you first start playing, it just feels super chaotic, as the kids get like tossed all over the board, all over the place. But once you understand it, it becomes a good amount of fun. I don't have to tell you to take a look at this one, because Boop is pretty popular these days, but I do think this is one that deserves popularity. I think this is a good game. I think Boop deserves a B, fittingly. And next up is another game I hated at any more than 2 players, Forest Shuffle. Forest Shuffle is a card drafting and tableau building game where players create their own forest ecosystem by strategically placing animals and plants to score points based on the synergies and the development of their environment. For me, this game is kind of like the new hotness. I played it many times before in the past, but always with more than 2 players. But man, once I started sort of just playing it exclusively at 2, it just became so much damn better. Downtime just like all but disappeared, and the forest area just became a lot more tactical, where I'm sort of like agonizing over using a card to pay for another card, but wondering if that card I get rid of might be the exact card my opponent needs. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, there are some balance issues in the base game, but they're mostly solved with the expansions. So perhaps I should specify that with expansions, I think this is an A tier game. Without expansions, with that balancing issue, it's probably a C. It's those damn wolves and the deer. When I see those 2 things come out, I cringe every time, as I hate seeing them. I want to rip them up. But it is a really good game, so I'm going to give it an A tier. And next up is Ironwood. Ironwood is a fun, fast-paced area control game that sees one player playing as the woodfolk, prancing around the trees and stealing resources, and the other player taking on the role of the Iron Lads, destroying everything and just lumbering around the board. Each attempt to fulfill their own objectives while messing up the plans of their opponent through constant battles and card shenanigans. The nature of the game is area control, and a lot of really cool action cards that come from a fairly sizable deck that you'll certainly learn the more you play, but you'll never feel safe enough to know what's going to come next from your opponent. And the cards also have served like a dual purpose, which I always enjoy in card games. So if you use the card for the action, you can't use it later for its battle ability. This creates a really tough and fun decision space. It's not the typical overwhelming depth that I expect from Mind Clash games, but I'm happy they did something that was a little out of the box for them, because I think this exclusively 2-player game, it works really, really well. And the asymmetric factions, they play very differently, and they're just both a joy to play. We actually did a review of this one, so if you want more details, definitely check it out. I gave this game a solid A. It's a great, quick little game. Definitely check out the review. Like I said, we go into far more depth. Really good game, A. And next up is pretty much any of the Undaunted games. In the newest Undaunted, you'll navigate this barren lunar landscape, maneuver to seize dominant high ground positions, and utilize your formidable mechs to gain control of Callisto and its precious, precious resources. This is such a great light war game that I wish I could play more, but Kim doesn't like it, and so my life is absolutely dreadful, I guess. I don't need to say much about this game. It's one of the many games that appear on everybody's list, and for a really good reason. It does a brilliant job of distilling a war game into an easy-to-manage card-driven game that actually makes you, in some small way, care about the soldiers you're commanding. Because as they perish, they're sort of removed from your deck, and it kind of hits pretty damn hard, especially since a lot of them have, I don't know, they kind of have like the personalized names at the bottom. I found it really well done. The whole thing is just a really well done game, and it's an easy S game. This is an easy S. And next up is Galactic Cruise. Galactic Cruise is a worker placement and engine building game where players compete to design the most luxurious spacefaring cruise line in history. By managing resources, upgrading ships, and attracting high-profile passengers, players navigate a dynamic economy to build the ultimate interstellar vacation experience. I know this one kind of plays best at 3, but I actually do really enjoy it at 2 players, and I wanted to toss in a new hotness type game just to spice things up a little, I guess. We've been playing this game a good amount because we're planning on reviewing it, and to spoil the surprise, both of us quite enjoy the experience. There's a lot of really cool elements in this game, like the bumping mechanic that acts as a sort of like pseudo-cooperation, where if you put your worker down, it removes the other player's worker, but the other player gets a sort of reward for it. It creates a really cool decision space, and while you're not working together, it's a cool way to interact. It's a procedural game, like a lot of Lacerda games, which it gets compared to a lot, but once you understand the system, it's fairly easy to get going and sort of remember. I also love that the game provides player powers that you gain during the game. I've always preferred differentiating myself from other players organically rather than being handed a faction sheet or something. It also employs actions that you can perform while resting or regrouping, which after dwellings, I now demand in all my worker placement games because, I don't know, resting has always just felt like you're skipping your turn, but here you actually get to perform an action and you get certain various incomes. I think at 3 players, it's sitting at an A-tier game, but at 2 players, it's still a really good experience. I do think this is worth checking out and playing at 2 players. So I'm gonna give it a B. I'm gonna give it a B. And next up is my favorite hidden movement game, Mind Management. Mind Management is a tense hidden movement game where a rogue psychic spy organization must be hunted down before they recruit too many agents. One player secretly moves to the city, while the others use deduction, strategy, and limited clues to track them down. Kim and I both bought this game on a sort of whim, and we're kind of like pleasantly surprised. I think right now it's our favorite hidden movement game, easily beating games like Mr. Jack or Letters from Whitechapel. I think we just really love that there feels like much more to do than simply deducing the location of the spy, because you have to interact with the agents too and trying to guess where they're recruiting from using your own intuition and clues. Plus, all the characters have their own special abilities, sometimes passive, sometimes an action, and trying to figure out what exactly to use on any given turn, it's a hell of a lot of fun. All of this, and I haven't even mentioned the really cool campaign system, how the losing player gets more abilities or characters or whatever as a way to balance the game between plays. It's just really cool, and it just every time you play it and you unlock the new stuff that you can do, it just adds depth after depth after depth. This is an easy A game. Yeah, in my opinion, it is the best hidden movement game. Easy A. And next up is Fort. Fort is a deck building game where players take on the role of kids, building the best fort, collecting toys, and making friends while managing their hand to maximize actions and outmaneuver their opponents. This is one of those games that I don't really enjoy, but I understand its appeal. Relying on these like suit synergies just gets really boring for me really fast. Like the game just felt very ordinary every time I played it, and it didn't feel like it was providing me something particularly unique. I love the theme. I really do love the theme, but this one for me, like I said, not bad, but it's pretty mid. I'm going to put it at a C. And next up is Azul Duel. Azul Duel is a 2-player tile placement strategy game where players draft and stack tiles to create intricate mosaics, introducing new pattern plates for a unique layout for each game. I really hope I'm not alone in this sentiment, but I kind of feel like I've grown tired of the original Azul. And while I'm not the biggest fan of this constant barrage of duel games that seems to be hitting the market these days, I mean, seriously, I think we have a King of Tokyo duel game. I do think this one, like the Splendor version, is actually better than the original. You're still doing lots of the things that you would do in Azul, but you get to draft those dome plates, which act as sort of blueprints on how you organize your board. It's a fun decision to make because you can only move tiles over to the scoring areas if they're matching the color on the dome plate in that row. Plus, they added stacking tiles on the factory board, and it's sort of up to you how they're ordered. Now that does add downtime to what would normally be a pretty snappy game, but I find if through repeated plays, we did enjoy that amount of agency, and we think it added more than it just subtracted. I think this one, along with Splendor Duel, is a duel game that's really well done and improves on the existing game very, very well. So if you like the original Azul, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. I think this one earns an easy, an A or a B. I'm gonna go B, a B. If I could give it a B plus, I would, but that doesn't exist in this tier list, so I'm just gonna stick it at B. And next up is the game that was the talk of the town for at least a couple of months, Wondrous Creatures. Wondrous Creatures is a strategy card game where players collect and play magical creatures with unique abilities, aiming to build powerful synergies and outmaneuver their opponents to score the most points possible. This was heralded by every content creator under the sun as being the big Everdale killer. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, that is definitely not true. The spatial puzzle, it adds via the worker placement, where you can place your worker next to a resource and either get that resource or a card of that same resource type, is an interesting one, but I didn't really find it particularly engaging or thoughtful enough to justify having this game over any other tableau builder. However, the card play in this game is kind of what saves it. It's really good, with many cards providing unique and creative methods to synergize with one another and provide abilities that will leave you feeling empowered as a player. I think there are going to be a lot of people who actually enjoy the first part of the game, and if you're one of those people, you definitely should check this out. But for myself and Kim, we didn't really like the first portion of the game, and that decision space didn't, like I said, it didn't really interest us, and at many times it kind of felt disjointed from the actual card play. But I do love a lot of the card types. Like, I like the energy cards and how they offer this like interesting limited use, but then there are other cards that kind of bolster them, providing even more energy and strategy. We go into more detail, of course, in our full review of this game, which you should check out. It's a fine game, and I give this is a well-earned B, I think. This is a good game. And next up is Unconscious Mind. Unconscious Mind is a worker placement game where players take on the role of psychologists in the late 19th century, helping patients through dream analysis while competing to build the most successful practice and advanced psychological theories. My enjoyment of this game went up immensely once I stopped playing it at more than 2 players. I think the extra players adds pretty much nothing to the game. That's pretty low interaction. And perhaps that's, I think, one of the game's biggest flaws as well. Now, of course, you can interact through the typical area denial methods that you get in every worker placement game, where it's like, oh, I took that spot that you want to take, or I drafted that card that you wanted to draft. But this is a mostly solitary sort of nose on board experience. The puzzle that the game is asking you to solve is an interesting one and fairly engaging. And I think that's really important. If you're telling me that I can't interact much with other players, then you better make sure that the puzzle you're asking me to solve is worth the effort. I also really like the resource wheel, because it some way reminds me of Glass Road or Black Forest, where you have all this other stuff you're doing, but the heart of the game in some way is sort of manipulating that resource puzzle. It's cool. I am putting this on, I think, the B tier. I'm struggling here because there are some times when I really enjoy the entire experience and can see this moving to an A tier someday. But for now, especially at 2 players, it's sitting at the B tier. In fact, like I said, I won't play this with any more than 2 players these days. And next up is Radlands. Radlands is a 2-player post-apocalyptic card game where players strategically deploy and use their faction's cards to manage resources, protecting their camps, and outmaneuver their opponents in a battle for survival. Super easy to teach and enjoyable to play. I always feel like the game has a super hard decisions to make, despite being a relatively simple game, and the abilities I choose to use always feel exciting, and they always feel interesting, and they always feel powerful. And despite being simple, there's a good amount of depth here. I enjoyed every playthrough of this game, and thankfully, there are a lot of different camps too, offering loads of variety and replayability. My only issue was through repeated play. Some cards felt definitely stronger than others, but wasn't that big of a deal. I was still having fun. Very cool game, worth checking out if you haven't already. This is a great B game, great B game. And next up, we have a super light, super fast game, Captain Flip. In Captain Flip, players take a tile from the bag and they decide if they want to play it or flip it to see what's on the other side. They place that bad boy onto their boat and then gain coins depending on the powers of the characters played. Finish 4 columns and the game ends, and whoever has the most coins is the winner. Captain Flip is just a wonderful little filler game. Obviously, there's not much interaction here beyond the ever-raging cartographer battle, where players earn a gold coin for every turn they're in possession of the cartographer tile, which is a nice touch in a game that would have otherwise no interaction at all. I was actually quite surprised that the game did manage to build up some tension and suspense despite its length. Like when you have 2 gunner tiles and you're just agonizing over whether you should flip the next upcoming tile, you're sort of like biting your nails because if you get 3 gunners, you lose the game. And I always get 3 gunners when I push that luck. I always get it. I still mostly play this on BGA and not the physical copy, but it's still a really good 2-player game to bust out between longer games or when somebody's coming over too early to a game session. I think this one deserves a solid B. It's a good game, especially for what it's attempting to do. And next up is Harmonies. Harmonies is an abstract strategy game where players draft discs at the start of their turn, which they'll use to place on their board to complete various patterns required by animal cards they've drafted. This is a seriously difficult game, and I can't stress this enough. It's super easy to learn and understand, but once you start playing, you're engaging in one hell of a mentally taxing puzzle. Trying to decide if you should draft a new animal card and what disc you should draft in what order. It's just so well done and engaging decision space to be in that I find it very challenging every time I play it. I won't get into much detail here, however, because we have done a full review of this game, so if you want to check that out, definitely check it out. But as a 2-player game, I'm giving this is an A game. This is among one of my favorite abstract games. And next up is the game that I love to rag on, Votes for Women. Votes for Women is a historical strategy game where players represent factions within the women's suffrage movement, working to secure votes for women by navigating political, social, and legal challenges while aiming to influence key states in the fight for voting rights. A tier list wouldn't be any fun without some stinkers to fill in that D section, and that's why Votes for Women is here. That's the only reason it's here. I want to fill out that D section. It's one of the most poorly designed games I've ever played in years. There are so many mechanical decisions here that just scream, in my opinion, amateur. There's really nothing fun about this game. But if you want a full rant, check out my hate video because this is one I think that needs to be avoided at all costs. Not the video, this game. Yeah, I just kind of threw this one in for fun. Sorry, it's a D-tier game. Next is Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation. Lord of the Rings Confrontation is a 2-player tactical game where one player controls the forces of Sauron and the other leads the Free Peoples, using hidden movement and strategic combat to achieve their respective goals of capturing the Ring Bearer or destroying the Dark Lord. I have had this game in my collection for what feels like forever. It's such a great game to whip out when somebody comes over early on game night. Yeah, it's basically Stratego, but the individual powers on each characters make it just make it a sort of wonderful mind game experience. I always find it so exciting to make your assault on a unit, not knowing exactly what your opponent is going to reveal, but then feeling like you're the smartest person on the planet because you knew it was going to be that warg tile and you owned it. You owned it. And the game doesn't overstay its welcome, and while it can feel a little chaotic at times, it provides enough meaningful depth and tactical fun. This one for me is a classic and it's an easy A game. Great game. And next up is Santorini. Santorini is a strategy game where players build structures on an island of Santorini, using simple movement and building mechanics to outmaneuver their opponent to be the first to reach the 3rd floor of the building while blocking their opponent's move. I really like this game, and it's such a shame Kim is not a fan because I would like to play it more. It's a really fun and cute abstract strategy game that plays very quickly. It's so simple to teach, and even when I show new players, they understand it in like a move or two. They understand the goal and they know exactly what they need to do. There's just lots of really great moments where the game facilitates this awesome feeling of being far smarter than you actually are by perfectly orchestrating the best move to make sure that your opponent has nothing they can do because you're getting to that highest building in a turn or two, and they can't do a damn thing about it. The individual player powers the game adds to the gods is also really great, but I can tell you right now, they're not properly balanced. But I don't care. Who cares? You don't have to include them, and including them just adds a little extra tactical dimension to the game that always feels like this really fascinating puzzle just begging to be solved. I can't see myself ever getting rid of this game despite how little I play it these days, but I do give it a B. This is a very good game. Screw it. You know what? I'm going to give this one an A. I really like Santorini. I wish Kim played it more. And next up is Res Arcana. Res Arcana is a fast-paced strategic card game where players use magical resources and powerful artifacts to summon creatures, cast spells, and compete to control ancient monuments in order to accumulate the most victory points possible. Such an interesting game that I remember actively avoiding for a while because from the outside it just looks like yet another card battler. I don't know why that is. But it's really cool, and it's more like a battling engine builder where 2 players are doing their best to slap down the exact cards they need to build the most effective and powerful resource generating engine ever. And you get to mess with your opponent once in a while to throw a little monkey wrench into their perfectly laid plans, which is great because otherwise there wouldn't be a lot of interaction here beyond the typical like race towards a shared objective, which is here is the 10 victory points. What's really neat about the game is that the amount of depth you get from a hand of cards, that's not even a fraction of the size of the typical Magic deck. With just a few cards, the game manages to make you think deeply on every turn and feel clever every time you pull out this like perfectly laid plan, just stealing that exact card your opponent was gunning for. It's just, it's really good fun. This to me is, I think it's a solid A game. This is a good A game. I could even see this hitting the S tier sometime down the road. I'm playing it quite a bit now in BGA. And next up is one of our favorite games of all time, Ark Nova. Ark Nova is a strategy game where players build and manage their own wildlife conservation parks using a mix of card drafting, engine building, and conservation efforts to create the most successful and sustainable zoo. Ark Nova, like I said, is Kim and I's favorite game to play together. I love busting this one out, and of course, we did a review of this game on our channel, so if you haven't seen that already, check it out. It's just endless gushing, basically. Not much needs to be said here. It's an awesome game, so many great mechanics that they just work perfectly together, and it's just, don't play this, in my opinion, don't play this at any more than 2 players. It is an awesome 2-player game. Yeah, this one's an S. S for sure. And next up is River of Gold. In River of Gold, players use their boat to travel down the river, performing various actions, such as developing new ports, markets, and various other buildings, as well as doing their best to grow their wealth and visit nobility, all in an effort to get as many points as possible. Now, a lot of people are going to say they prefer this at 3 and 4, and I get that. It makes sense because it allows for more interaction to the shared use of buildings and more competition on the influence tracks. However, I think this game is best at 2 because it becomes a far more tactical and interesting experience without the chaotic fluctuation of the board state, where you'll never get the building you want because it will be gone between turns. What's interesting here is there is so much to balance here because you need to move your ship down the river to gain resources, but you also need to make a delivery to gain special powers and construct buildings to provide better opportunities for movement. And you need to worry if your opponent is close to fulfilling any of the public objectives. And despite all those plates you're sort of balancing at any given time, the game just feels, it sounds contradictory, the game actually just feels oddly chill. You're just kind of like traveling a little boat down this lazy river, landing on opponents' buildings now and then and helping them out while also, of course, helping yourself out. I enjoy the experience. Despite how much I love being mean in games, sometimes it can be fun to engage in a mutually beneficial relationship. It's kind of why I love Keyflower so much, sending your workers out to other people's villages and giving them stuff, but of course you get stuff. This is just a really fun game that I think is a well-deserved A. I think it's a really good 2-player game. And next up is Raptor. Raptor is a 2-player asymmetric strategy game where one player controls a team of scientists attempting to capture baby raptors, while the other player plays as a mother raptor using cunning and speed to protect her young and outmaneuver the hunters. I played this game quite a bit when I first bought it. I really dug it, but after maybe 10 players or so, it just went downhill fast. Every game felt repetitive, and strategies never felt like they evolved over our plays. A lot of the games started to feel like my success or failure was entirely based on the luck, the luck of the draw, instead of, whether or not I executed a well thought out plan. And that randomness just felt so damn unsatisfying. I do really love the novelty of this game, though. Maybe it's okay that some games, they're not built to last, if that makes any sense. Let me know in the comment section if this makes any sense. Sometimes it's okay, I think, to buy a game with the understanding that it's going to be played a limited amount of times. This is, of course, provided you live in a city that has a good secondary market where you can resell it. But yeah, I think I'm starting to see that it's okay to have games that I know just won't stay in my collection forever, but that I'll enjoy, at least for a limited playtime. And I think Raptor is one of those games. But where it sits right now, I kind of put this at a D. I do not like this game anymore. And next up is one of my favorite card games, Seasons. Seasons is a strategic card and dice game where players compete as wizards, managing their resources, casting powerful spells, and harnessing the challenging seasons to earn the most victory points over the 3-year period. Seasons has been in my collection since the dawn of time. It's a great 2-player game with just an abundance of take that and general meanness, which I just thoroughly love. Yeah, I understand that likely turned many of you off, but if you do enjoy cruelty at the hand of a deck of cards wielded by the opposing player, this is the one you want to look for. I don't need to say much more about this classic. It's a brilliant game. I think this is an easy S game. I really love Seasons. And next up is Aristeia. Aristeia is a tactical combat game where players control a team of elite fighters, each with unique abilities to compete in fast-paced, arena-style battles aimed at scoring points and outmaneuvering their opponents. So this sits in the middle between a miniature game and a board game. You can buy more characters, but honestly, just having the base game works perfectly well. It's such a cool game that focuses more on tactical maneuvering than it does combat, even though the combat is really important, because you need to be in these like scoring areas at the end of every round. So you're doing your best to sort of get in that position yourself, and it's sort of pushing your opponents out of that position. Tons of neat characters with really unique abilities that make drafting them just a ton of fun all on its own, like its own unique game that's just really enjoyable. And there are loads of expansions now, so you'll never get bored or feel like you're playing the same game. I think if you wanted a nice little bridge between two hobbies, the miniature gaming and board gaming, this might be the one. It's a brilliant game, easy A game. Next up is Five Tribes. Five Tribes is a strategic area control game where players manipulate the 5 tribes of Arabia, using worker placement and movement mechanics to control territories, gather resources, and earn points through actions and tactics. This is another one of those games that plays more and honestly just becomes a totally different game once you start exclusively playing it at 2. The bidding for turn order almost becomes this like really cool game all on its own, where you're trying to quickly do the mental math and figure out like if bidding X amount is worth it, and if you can manage to get 2 turns in a row, because that's the strongest strategy in the game, because you want to set yourself up on your next turn. Five Tribes is a classic and honestly is one of the best 2-player board games on the market today. Bruno really is the king of making easy to understand games with a load of depth. This is an obvious S tier game. Five Tribes is brilliant at 2 players. And next up is Paladins of the West Kingdom. Paladins of the West Kingdom is a worker placement and engine building game where players recruit and assign paladins to defend the kingdom, build fortifications, and complete various tasks to earn influence and gain victor points. I think this is still our favorite of the McDonald and Shem team-up games, but we do really like Wayfarer. It's lost a little bit of its luster over the years since many games of Paladins started to feel a little similar, but there's just something about the card play mechanic through the Paladins where you're selecting the paladin you play now, the paladin you want in the future, and maybe a paladin that you'll never see again. When you have to make that decision every turn, I find it, even though it's really simple, it's really enjoyable. But yeah, aside from that, this is just a game of constant resource collection and victory point salad goodness. As it is right now, I see this as a B tier game. It's a good game still. We do really enjoy it. And next up is a game that nobody seems to talk about, Super Motherload. Super Motherload is a deck building and resource management game where players dig deep into Mars' surface to collect valuable resources, upgrade their equipment, and compete to uncover the most precious treasures. This is such an underrated game that just nobody talks about, but I'm telling you right now, it's pretty damn fun. And not only that, but it's a game that actually feels pretty creative. Yeah, at its heart, it's a deck builder, but accumulating your resources by tactically digging downwards to get gems and bombs, it's so fresh and it's so fun. And I even like the constraints it puts on the player when you gain resources, because you have to put all the resources gained in for the action on a single card. It's a cool way to engage players in a rather difficult tactical decision. This does play more than 2, but like many games on this list, it plays best at 2. No required to go out and buy it right away, but you should at least find a way to check it out. This is a great game. Perfect A game. I love it. Next up is Imperial Settlers. Imperial Settlers is a strategy card game where players build and expand their own civilization using unique faction abilities, acquiring resources, and constructing buildings to score points and outpace their opponents. This is another one of Kim's favorite games. It's just this like great 2-player game based on 51st State. It also has some really great take that elements that you actually don't have to play if you don't want to play that way, but I do because I'm not a nice person. It's also a really great engine building, and the game just feels really satisfying as you build up this like perfect civilization as it speeds along collecting victory points and resources. I think this is the perfect B game candidate. I don't love it as much as Kim does, but it is a really good game. And next up is a game I'm going to sneak in here for all the miniature gaming fans, Moonstone. Welcome to the land of Tauber, a peaceful and mythical land of fantasy, where humans, goblins, gnomes, and all sorts of silly little creatures gather on clear summer nights, each anxiously gazing into the night with shaky hand and eyes that twinkle. But that glimmer comes not from the pearlescent rooms of Tauber, for you see, Something else has arrived tonight. Sprouting out from the ground like crystalline toadstools, moonstones have graced this midnight ball. Objects of mysterious wonder which the great factions of Tauber all scheme to ensnare in their greedy little hands. All have come to this meadow on this one somber night to witness the peace of this beautiful land disappear over the shining precipice of these glimmering and alluring stones, which when touched by daylight will turn to nothing more than dust. I wanted to sneak a single miniature game into the list, and I thought Moonstone was the perfect fit. So don't skip this part, you board game purists. I'm watching you. Don't skip it. I promise it's good. We actually have a playthrough of this game coming to this channel pretty soon, in say like a month or two, and I promise it's going to be like just an awesome playthrough. We also have a video where I sort of give an overview of Moonstone, and I think that is also worth watching because I think this is just, it's the perfect gateway miniature game that doesn't require you to buy loads and loads of boxes. You just need a starter set or maybe just like 2 boxes and you're just good to go. But the important takeaway is that this game is what all those like crappy boss battlers and other board games with miniatures are trying to do. The combat in this game is fresh and it's creative, involving card play and these like awesome mind games that can occur at the table. Melee in this game actually feels like a legit duel with your opponent and not just some like mindless roll-off. The characters are fun and they're interesting. You can play this easily in under 90 minutes. It is the miniature gateway game. So forget anything by Games Workshop and just get Moonstone because this is a solid S game. A brilliant 2-player game and honestly the best starter miniature game you could ever play. Like I said, watch that video that I made. If that doesn't sell you, nothing will. Next up is Caper Europe. Caper Europe is a 2-player card game where players take on the role of rival thieves, strategically recruiting skilled criminals to carry out heists across Europe and trying to steal the most valuable treasures while outmaneuvering their opponent. This is such a fun little quick filler game that really provides a lot more than you'd think given how short it is. I've never been a fan of those sort of like battle line style games where it's, you know, this constant tug of war. But I find this one far more clever because it encourages these like subtle mind games where I'm trying to figure out, you know, which criminals they're going to draft and what objects they're attempting to steal so that I can sort of beat them to the punch. There's lots of neat little mechanical interactions as well, finding the perfect scoring combinations and doing your best to position your gear on your criminal to protect the good stuff when the opponent busts out the flamethrower. It's really enjoyable. I think this is a good B tier game. This is a really good B tier game. And next up, we have my favorite game from 2024, The Jest of Robin Hood. The Jest of Robin Hood is a coin game where the sheriff chases Robin Hood across Nottingham as Robin Hood organizes peasant revolts and attempts to steal supplies from the sheriff's caravan. The mechanics of this game are they're just so damn good. The sneaky mechanics are wonderfully clever and add a great deal of depth without bogging you down with rules. And the way the carriages work that are under the control of the sheriff is also really cool. It just makes thematic and mechanical sense because it's easier to sneak with less characters as Robin Hood, and it creates a good amount of a sort of head games too because the sheriff is doing his best to figure out where Robin Hood is. And speaking of bluffing, I really love the carriage mechanic, and because in order for the sheriff to get gold, you have to send these carriages out after collecting taxes from the towns, and they have to make it back to Nottingham without Robin Hood robbing it. But the cool thing is that you can set up these bluffs where you can make Robin Hood think it's the undefended cart, but really it's like just a bunch of guards just waiting to pounce. The card play is of course really brilliant. It uses a shared deck with benefits to both sides of the same card, and it's challenging and it's engaging to make that sort of hard choice to enact that card action or do your own plots and deeds like recruiting or capturing. This is a great way to sort of dip your toes into the coin series. It's an awesome game. And it's super worthy of an S tier, I think. Yeah, best game of 2024, S tier game. Next up is another game I will never play for more than 2 players, Grand Austria Hotel. Grand Austria Hotel is a dice placement game where players manage an hotel, hiring staff, serving guests, and expanding their facilities to earn victory points by efficiently balancing resources and actions. Like Five Tribes, Grand Austria Hotel was one of those games I didn't really like when I first started playing it. But once I switched to 2 players, I loved it. Because it all but eliminated downtime through its special sort of alternating turns. Grand Austria is a really great dice selection game where every turn feels so rewarding and fulfilling, trying to do your best to as efficiently as possible with your actions because the game is all about timing and opportunities and determining if taking that big risk will be worth it in the long run. And there is so much replayability here beyond the asymmetric hotel boards because the staff cards are always different and they can dictate how you play in the game. but also the order of the guests come in and what, emperor bonuses or penalties there are going to be for the game. There's just so much here that makes each game feel truly unique as you solve this, albeit mostly solitary puzzle, doing your best to fill your hotel and get as many bonuses as possible. This is an easy A game that is just stayed in my collection for so long. I love it. It's great. Next up is another game that I love from 2024, Castle Combo. In Castle Combo, players draft cards to build a 3x3 tableau to trigger instant effects and endgame bonuses, all to get the most victory points by the end of the game. This is one of my favorite games from 2024 that took me by a huge surprise. I was expecting nothing from this game, but man, did I enjoy the hell out of it when I played it on Board Game Arena. I'm still trying to get a hold of the physical copy because I really do like this game. Considering the ease of the game, there is a good amount here to keep me interested on every single turn, and more importantly, aware of what my opponents are doing, because there's a good amount of interacting with the player at the table, which I find fairly rare in these types of simple card games. Also, a really good variety of scoring methods, which again, for a simple card game is pretty impressive. I love how each card has its own ability that you have to be aware of, while also keeping in mind its scoring objective and its placement and its shield type and its cost. There's a lot to follow that makes the game really engaging and interesting. There's also many ways you can mitigate bad luck here, because you only draw from either the top or the bottom row of cards, and you can use what the game calls keys to change where the messenger is, and you can use the key also to refresh that card row. It's a really nice touch, and it's super welcome in a card game. This, to me, is an easy S tier game. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I hope I can get the physical copy eventually. Next up is Obsession. Obsession is a worker placement game set in Victorian England, where players manage noble families, build estates, and cultivate relationships to gain influence, win favor, and score victor points in this high society world. This is a game Kim and I were playing almost religiously for almost a year straight. We don't play it as much often now, but we still do bust it out from time to time when we want some fairly laid-back fun. There's a number of issues I've started having with this game over the years. I don't like that my objective is more or less the same every single game, and the buildings themselves don't have a lot of variety between them. But it's still a really good game, and it's a theme I really enjoy. And I'm a huge sucker for worker placement games with workers that provide different powers, and so the expansion for this game, in my opinion, is a must. I love the delayed mechanic where your workers, they don't come back right away, but rather you have to sort of wait. Yeah, it's restricting, but little touches like that add a good tactical experience that provides something new to ponder over every single turn. But strategy tip, just get prestigious guests whenever you can and just stockpile those fools. You will win almost every single time. But despite those select few flaws, it's still a B tier game. I do really enjoy it. And next up is everyone's favorite cooperative game, Spirit Island. Spirit Island is a cooperative game where players control powerful spirits defending their island from colonial invaders using unique abilities and elemental synergies to drive them away. This is such a wonderful game to play cooperatively at 2 players. In fact, I would say it's probably the best 2-player cooperative game that you will ever find. Despite the repetitive nature of how the enemy reacts, there is just something so refreshing and interesting in regards to the individual spirits and the powers they provide. It's unlike something like Pandemic, where you're tasked with a single simple role. You have a variety of strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to you and your teammate to figure out the best way to synergize with one another. There are so many games out there that are cooperative, but never really feel like you are cooperating. You're simply kind of on the same side. Here, it generally feels like you're working together against the odds when they're stacked against you, fighting the game system. On one turn, you can feel so immensely powerful, while on the other, you can feel so weak and helpless. The game it's an amazing game, and it's well worth the dense rule set, in my opinion. At 2 players, this to me is an easy S tier game. Next up is a new game, Harrow County. Harrow County is a thematic strategy game where players explore a dark supernatural world using their unique abilities to uncover secrets, control territory, and confront the eerie forces that haunt the land. What a neat little abstract game that provides a pretty fun experience at 2 players, despite the game saying it can play more. It's an asymmetric game where one player plays the side where you're sort of moving around the board doing your best to rescue the villagers by creating a sort of continuous path. And on the other side, you're destroying the town with cyclones. There are so many great opportunities for clever play in this game, and for an abstract game, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Deciding on any given turn when you need to go on the offensive and seek your own objectives, or go on the defensive and ensure your opponent gets a giant roadblock put in its way, is a really good decision space to be in, and it's a lot of fun to do. I think I'm sticking this in the B tier, but I think with some expansions and some new factions, I could see this rising. But for now, Easy B tier game. I do really enjoy it. Kim also really loves it. And finally, we have Loot. In Loot, players control a horde of Vikings raiding the mainland, capturing buildings, stealing the Englishman's cute little sheep, and just racking up as much riches as possible while getting your opponent's way on every single turn until you are crowned Jarl of the Vikings. We have covered this game on this channel, I think, many times, and I can't sing the praises for this game enough. We're still playing it to this day, and hopefully that continues down the road, because the fun I have by placing my Vikings on the primary board and doing my best to sort of passive-aggressively foil my opponent's plan, it's just good fun. Because it's just, I don't know, it's just, to me, it's an enjoyable way to interact. If you want more info, though, and a more detailed analysis of this game, definitely check out our full review. It's on this channel, or many of the other reviews we've done of this game. It's a great, great A-tier game. I love Loot. And that is all of the games. But we know people will be skipping to this segment to see the final tier results. So I say we intentionally fuck with those people. Now, of course, this entire tier list, it was all a lie. And there is really only one tier list possible when determining the best two-player games. Behold, naturally, Patchwork is the only S-tier game. And every other game that is not Patchwork exists only in the D tier. I know what you're thinking. You mean to tell me this entire, hour-plus long video was simply to establish what we have already known all along, that Patchwork is the only game you need? Yes, that is right. And shame on you for clicking on a video where you know the only two-player game you need is this beautiful gem. Now, get out of here, you crazy kids. I'll see you in the next one. Later, guys.